The sun burned hot over the dusty plains of Montana. A lone cowboy rode through that endless stretch of land, his head tilted low, his lips cracked from thirst, and his heart heavier than his saddle. His name was Wyatt Cole, a man with no home, no kin, and nothing left but a horse named Dusty and a past he never talked about. Days on the trail had turned him into a shadow of himself, hardened by loneliness and haunted by regrets of wars and broken promises. That afternoon, as his canteen ran dry, he saw something unusual through the heat waves. A small cabin by the river, surrounded by wild sunflowers swaying in the breeze. It looked like a dream painted over the barren land. At the wooden fence stood a woman in a white dress, her hands washing linen in a tin tub, her golden hair catching the sunlight. She looked up as he approached, her eyes steady but kind. "Ma'am," Wyatt called softly, voice rough from the dust. "I ain't looking for trouble. Just a sip of water." The woman paused, then smiled the kind of smile that could cool the desert itself. "Water's free to every soul that asks kindly," she said, her voice calm as the river behind her. The water wasn't just cool, it felt like forgiveness. She introduced herself as Clara Rose, the daughter of a preacher who once dreamed of seeing the ocean, but settled in the middle of nowhere instead. Her father had passed years ago, and since then, she kept the land and the house running alone. Wyatt offered a quiet thank you, tipped his hat, and turned to leave, but she said, "You look like you could use more than water, mister." The smell of cornbread, stew, and smoke from the fire wrapped around him like a memory he'd forgotten he missed. As the evening deepened, Clara asked him where he came from. He stared into the fire, the flicker lighting scars across his face. "From places better left buried," he said. But Clara didn't press. She only said, "Every man deserves a second chance, even the ones who don't believe it anymore." Something in her tone made Wyatt's heart ache. He had met women before, saloon girls, wanderers, but never one who looked at him like she could see past his sins. Over the next few days, Wyatt helped around the homestead, fixing the fence, chopping wood, mending the roof. What started as a favor turned into something deeper. He began to look forward to Clara's laughter, the way she hummed old hymns while tending her garden, and the peace that wrapped the place like morning dew. It was the first time in years he felt like he belonged somewhere. But under that peace, danger always rode close. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, two riders appeared, men Wyatt once rode with during his darker days. Wyatt's jaw tightened. He knew what men like them could do. The taller one grinned. "Well, if it ain't Wyatt Cole. Heard you'd gone straight. Looks like you found yourself a little paradise." Clara stepped back, fear flashing in her eyes, but Wyatt moved in front of her, his voice steady. "This place ain't for your kind anymore." The men laughed. "We just came for what's fair, some food, maybe a little company." Wyatt's hand rested on his revolver. He didn't want blood on Clara's land, but he also knew mercy meant nothing to men like that. Before the standoff could explode, Clara whispered, "Please, don't do this here." Something in her trembling voice cut deeper than any bullet. The next few seconds blurred into chaos, gunfire, screams, and dust rising under the crimson sky. When the smoke cleared, one outlaw lay dead, the other riding off into the dusk, swearing vengeance. Wyatt stood there, breathing hard, his shoulder bleeding. Clara ran to him, tears in her eyes, pressing cloth against the wound. "You didn't have to protect me," she whispered. "Yes, I did," he replied, his voice breaking. "You're the first light I've seen in years." That night, as the crickets sang and the stars lit up the sky, Clara sat beside him on the porch. She brought him tea and silence, both worth more than gold. "Why'd you stop here, Wyatt?" she asked softly. He looked toward the moon. "I was just looking for water," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "And what did you find instead?" Wyatt turned his gaze to her, his heart stirring for the first time in forever. "Maybe something I don't deserve," he murmured. She placed her hand gently on his. "Sometimes the Lord gives us what we need, not what we think we deserve." The wind rustled the fields, carrying the scent of wildflowers, and for the first time in his life, Wyatt felt peace. But somewhere in that peace, he knew the past wasn't done with him yet. What began as a search for water had turned into the start of something far deeper, a bond born of kindness and courage. He didn't know it yet, but the choice he made that evening would change both their lives forever. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet rhythm of life at Clara Rose's homestead began to heal the broken pieces of Wyatt Cole's soul. The mornings came soft and golden, with coffee on the porch and the sound of Clara humming while feeding the chickens. Wyatt found peace in the simple things: repairing fences, drawing water from the well, and listening to the river whisper at night. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a ghost drifting through the world. He'd killed a man that day defending Clara, and he knew men like the one who escaped wouldn't forget it. Outlaws didn't forgive, they came back with vengeance. One cold morning, Wyatt was saddling Dusty to ride into town for supplies when Clara came out holding a small package, wrapped in cloth. "You forgot your lunch," she said with a shy smile. Wyatt took it, looking into her eyes longer than he meant to. "You keep spoiling me, Miss Clara," he said. "That's what happens when you start acting like family," she teased, turning away before he could see her blush. He watched her walk back toward the house and realized that somewhere between the chores and the laughter, she had become home. That evening, the sky turned strange to still, to quiet. Even the crickets fell silent. Wyatt's instincts flared. A moment later, 3 riders emerged from the dusk, torches in hand. The outlaw who'd escaped was among them, a scar now cutting across his cheek. "Wyatt Cole," he shouted, his voice echoing through the valley. "You took my brother's life, and now I'm here to take yours." Clara ran to the doorway, fear flashing in her eyes, but Wyatt motioned for her to stay back. "Clara, go inside," Wyatt said quietly. She shook her head. "You can't fight them alone." He gave a half smile. "Ain't got much choice, darlin'. Some things a man's gotta face." Before she could argue, the outlaws fired a warning shot. The sound shattered the stillness, and everything exploded into chaos. Wyatt fired back, taking cover behind the water trough. Bullets splintered the fence posts, and the horse neighed wildly. Clara ducked behind the door, praying under her breath. Then, through the smoke and firelight, she saw something that froze her heart. One of the men had flanked Wyatt, aiming from behind. Without thinking, Clara grabbed her father's old rifle from above the fireplace, stepped out onto the porch, and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out true, striking the outlaw's shoulder. Wyatt spun in surprise as the man fell. The gunfire died down, leaving only the crackle of torches and the heavy breath of fear. Clara dropped the rifle, her hands trembling. He walked to her slowly, took her by the shoulders, and said softly, "You just saved my life." Tears welled in her eyes. "You saved mine first." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire from the torches flickered across their faces, and somewhere between danger and destiny, something changed forever. Wyatt buried the fallen men on the edge of the field, marking the graves with wooden crosses. As he worked, Clara brought him water, just like the first day they met. When he looked up at her, her eyes weren't filled with fear anymore, they were filled with trust. "You could ride away, Wyatt," she said quietly. "No one would blame you." He took the cup, his hand brushing hers. "And leave the only person who ever made me believe I could be better." He said, "No, ma'am. I reckon I've done enough runnin'." Over the next few months, the seasons changed. Wyatt fixed the barn roof, built a new fence, and even carved a rocking chair for Clara's porch. They didn't speak much of love out here. Love wasn't about words. It was in the way she waited for him every evening, the way he always poured her first cup of coffee, the way their hands brushed when passing a plate. One Sunday afternoon, while the sun painted the sky orange, Wyatt finally found the courage to say what had been burning in his heart. They stood by the riverbank where they first met, the same water sparkling in the light. "Clara," he began, his voice low and rough, "the day I asked you for water, I thought I was just a skin to survive. But you gave me something more than life, you gave me a reason to live it." She smiled, eyes glistening. "And what are you a skin for now, Wyatt Cole?" He took off his hat, stepped closer, and said, "I'm a skin. If you'd let a worn-out cowboy spend whatever days the Lord gives him right here, by your side." Clara reached out, touched his cheek, and whispered, "I already did the day you knocked on my door." The wind carried her words through the tall grass, and the river sang beneath the evening sun. As Wyatt drew her into his arms, he knew that for once in his life, He'd found something that couldn't be lost or stolen. The cowboy who came searching for water had found love instead. Love that would last a lifetime. Years later, folks around those parts would still tell the story of the man who rode out of the desert looking for a drink and found redemption instead. They called it the legend of Wyatt and Clara Rose, a tale of faith, courage, and the kind of love that only the Old West could forge. And as the camera fades on the golden horizon, let the narrator's voice return softly if stories of love, redemption, and timeless Western courage stir your soul. Then saddle up and subscribe to Old West Story. Because out here, every sunset holds another story waiting to be told.